You have been told that strength means feeling no fear. Aristotle said the opposite, that the man who feels no fear is not brave but broken, missing something essential to being human. This matters because most of us measure our courage by how little we tremble, when Aristotle measured it by what we do while trembling. The gap between those two ideas is where most people misunderstand their own strength. In this video we will examine what Aristotle actually meant by courage, the virtue that lives, precisely, between two extremes. Before we go further, if this kind of philosophy interests you, subscribe. We publish new videos every week on ideas that actually change how you think. Around 340 BC, in the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle placed courage first among the moral virtues, and defined it not as the absence of fear, but as the right response to it. That single distinction reshapes everything you think you know about being brave. Begin with the claim that offends modern instinct. Aristotle writes in the Nicomachean Ethics, Book 3, that the person who fears nothing at all is not courageous but has no name we would honor. He calls such a man mad or insensible. This is because fear, in Aristotle's account, is not a weakness to be eliminated but a form of perception, a way the soul registers what is genuinely dangerous. If you cannot feel fear, you cannot see danger clearly, which means you cannot make the deliberate choice to face it. Therefore fearlessness is not the summit of courage but its failure, a kind of blindness dressed as strength. What this reveals is that Aristotle was not interested in the man who charges without hesitation, because hesitation, properly understood, is intelligence responding to threat. The brave man feels the full pressure of what he risks, his life, his standing, his future, and this is precisely why his action carries moral weight. To act well while feeling nothing would be no achievement at all. But this raises a harder question: if fear is not the enemy of courage, then what exactly is Aristotle asking us to master? To understand courage, we must understand the structure Aristotle built beneath every virtue. In the Nicomachean Ethics, 1106b, he argues that moral excellence is a mean between two vices, one of excess and one of deficiency. This is why virtue is difficult, because there are many ways to go wrong and only one way to go right, just as it is easy to miss a target and hard to strike its center. Courage, therefore, is not a quality you either have or lack, but a precise point of balance between two failures that pull in opposite directions. However, Aristotle is careful to warn that this mean is not a mathematical midpoint, identical for everyone. What counts as the right amount of fear depends on the situation, the danger, and the person facing it, which means courage cannot be reduced to a formula. It requires judgment, what he calls practical wisdom, applied in the specific moment. This is what makes his ethics so demanding and so honest, because it refuses to hand us a rule we can follow without thinking. And yet if courage sits between two extremes, we must name them exactly. One of them everyone recognizes. The other almost no one warns you about. The deficiency is familiar. The coward feels too much fear or fears the wrong things, and so he retreats when he should stand, abandoning the good he was meant to protect. We understand this failure instinctively because we have all felt the pull to flee. But Aristotle insists there is a second, opposite failure, and it is the one modern culture rarely condemns: rashness, the excess of confidence. The rash man, he writes in Book 3, rushes toward danger without properly weighing it, driven not by strength but by a failure to perceive what he faces. What makes Aristotle's observation so cutting is his note that many rash men are cowards in disguise, loud before the danger arrives, absent once it is real. This is why he treats rashness not as an admirable excess of courage but as a genuine vice, because it produces the appearance of bravery without its substance. The reckless person and the brave person may look identical from a distance, and yet they differ entirely in what governs their action. One is driven by ignorance, the other by deliberate choice. Therefore courage is not simply doing the dangerous thing. It is doing it for the right reason, at the right time, having seen it clearly. But this forces a deeper question about what actually happens inside the brave person at the moment of decision. Aristotle offers a portrait that is almost uncomfortable in its realism. The brave man, he says in the Nicomachean Ethics, feels fear as any sane person would, yet he endures it because to do so is noble and to fail to do so is shameful. This means courage is not the erasure of feeling but the ordering of it, the subordination of a real and painful emotion to a clear understanding of what is worth doing. The brave man is not comfortable. He may be as afraid as anyone, and yet his fear does not govern his action, his reason does. What elevates this description above simple willpower is Aristotle's insistence that the truly courageous person also feels the fear rightly, neither more nor less than the situation demands. He does not manufacture false calm, nor does he exaggerate the threat into paralysis. Because his perception is accurate, his response can be accurate, and this alignment between seeing clearly and acting rightly is the heart of the virtue. Therefore courage, for Aristotle, is a kind of truthfulness, a refusal to let either panic or bravado distort what is actually at stake. And yet even this leaves something unexplained. Why does Aristotle place courage first among the virtues, above so many others that seem more constant? Aristotle narrows courage to its most severe form deliberately. The truest courage, he argues in Book 3, is shown in the face of death, and specifically the noblest death in battle, where the stakes are absolute and nothing can be recovered. This is because the value of a thing is tested by what we are willing to lose for it, and there is nothing greater to lose than life itself. A man who acts well when the cost is small tells us little about his character, but a man who acts well when the cost is everything reveals what he truly values. However, Aristotle does not restrict courage to soldiers. He extends the principle to any situation where we must endure something painful or frightening for the sake of what is good, because the structure is the same even when the danger is smaller. What death clarifies is the logic hidden in every act of courage, that we sometimes face a genuine loss and choose it anyway, not because we do not feel it, but because something matters more. This is why courage cannot be faked over time, since fear eventually arrives to test whether the virtue is real. But if courage is proven under pressure, how does anyone come to possess it before the pressure arrives? Here Aristotle separates himself from every account that treats virtue as a mood or a moment of inspiration. In the Nicomachean Ethics, 1103a, he insists that moral virtue comes about as a result of habit, we become just by doing just acts, and brave by doing brave acts. This means courage is not something you either are born with or wait to feel, but something you build through repeated action, the way a craftsman becomes skilled by practicing his craft. The implication is severe and liberating at once, because it locates courage not in temperament but in what you have repeatedly chosen to do. Therefore the person who acts bravely in small things, again and again, is quietly shaping himself into someone capable of acting bravely when it counts. And yet Aristotle is careful to note that a single act does not make you brave, just as one swallow does not make a summer. The virtue lives in the settled disposition, the reliable readiness to act well. What this reveals is that courage is less like a spark and more like a structure, assembled slowly through countless ordinary decisions we rarely dignify with the name. But if courage is built through practice, then the question becomes intensely practical: where, in an ordinary life, do we actually practice it? Few of us will face a battlefield, and yet Aristotle's account translates with unsettling precision to the fears we do face. The anxiety that survives every distraction, the decision we postpone because we cannot bear its weight, the truth we withhold because speaking it risks our standing, each of these is a place where courage is required and where cowardice quietly wins. Aristotle would say that avoiding these is not caution but a failure to act rightly under fear, the deficiency he named so exactly. This is why his philosophy is not merely historical, because the structure of the virtue applies wherever a person must feel fear and choose the noble action anyway. The rash response is equally modern, the impulsive leap taken to avoid the discomfort of deliberation, mistaken for boldness but rooted in the same wish to escape fear rather than face it. What Aristotle demands instead is harder than either flight or recklessness: to stay present with the fear, see the situation clearly, and act on what you judge to be right. Therefore the daily test is not dramatic but constant, 1,000 small crossings where you either build the disposition or erode it. And this leads to the deepest point of all, the one that changes how you understand every choice you have ever avoided. Aristotle does not treat courage as an isolated skill but as bound to the entire architecture of a good life. In his account, no single virtue functions alone, because practical wisdom is required to know what genuine danger deserves our fear, and justice is required to know which goods are worth defending. This means the truly brave man cannot be a fool or a scoundrel, since courage aimed at the wrong end is not courage at all but a dangerous energy in service of vice. Aristotle notes that the tyrant's henchman may endure great danger without flinching, and yet we do not call him brave, because the end he serves corrupts the act entirely. What this reveals is that courage borrows its worth from the purpose it serves, and cannot be evaluated apart from the good it defends. Therefore the cultivation of courage is inseparable from the cultivation of judgment about what actually matters, which is why Aristotle's ethics resists any shortcut. You cannot become brave while remaining confused about what is worth risking yourself for. And this points, finally, to the most practical implication of everything we have examined, the shift in perspective that turns Aristotle's theory into a way of living. The most useful thing Aristotle gives us is not the definition of courage but the method of acquiring it. Because virtue is habit, the way to become brave is to identify, in your own life, the two extremes you are prone to, and to lean deliberately against whichever one pulls harder. Aristotle offers exactly this counsel in Book 2, advising that since we err more easily toward one extreme, we should steer ourselves toward the opposite as men straighten a bent stick. This means self-knowledge is the beginning of courage, because you cannot correct a tendency you have not honestly named. If you tend toward avoidance, your practice is to move toward the fear you would rather escape. If you tend toward recklessness, your discipline is to pause and see clearly before you leap. Therefore courage is not summoned in a great moment but assembled beforehand, in the ordinary hours when the stakes are low and no one is watching. What this reveals is that the brave man of the battlefield and the person who quietly does the frightening right thing at their desk are engaged in the same practice, differing only in scale. Aristotle's final gift is this: courage is available to anyone willing to feel their fear honestly and act, again and again, toward what they judge to be good. Aristotle's courage is not the absence of fear but its right ordering, the deliberate choice to face what frightens us for the sake of something worth defending, balanced precisely between the coward's retreat and the reckless man's blind rush. He shows us that this virtue is not inherited but built, assembled through countless ordinary acts long before the decisive moment arrives. The practical implication is simple and demanding: name the extreme you lean toward, and practice leaning against it today, while the stakes are small. Aristotle spent a lifetime studying what it means to live well. The least we can do is spend 10 minutes thinking about it. Subscribe if you want to keep thinking. And if you want to go deeper, I have put together a free Stoic starter kit, 20 quotes, a 7-day routine, and a printable journal. Link in the description. Any books mentioned today are also linked there.